Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Pepis, Interim Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Robert Pinsky, poet, essayist, editor, translator, educator. He served as the United States Poet Laureate from 1997 to 2000. Pinsky teaches at Boston University and is the author of more than a dozen collections of his own verse. As Poet Laureate, he founded the Favorite Poem Project, which features individual Americans reading and speaking personally about poems they love. His latest book is Singing School, Learning to Write and Read Poetry by Studying with the Masters. On November 7, 2013, Pinsky gave a reading as a guest of the UO Creative Writing Program. Robert, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here, Paul.
Would you be willing to begin our conversation by reading a poem?
Sure. I'll start with the poem that I chose to put first in my selected poems. When you do a selected poems, you can rearrange things. And the poem I put first is called Rhyme. Rhyme. Air an instrument of the tongue an instrument of the body an instrument of the spirit a being of the air. Each bird the medium of its song, each song a world, a containment, like the hotel room, ready for us guests who inherit our compartment of time there. In the Joseph Cornell box among ephemera as its element, the preserved bird, a study in spontaneous elegy, the parrot, art, mortal in its cornered sphere. Each room a stanza rung in a laddered filament, clambered by all us unsteady chambered voices that share it, each one reciting, I too was here. I too was here, in a room, a rhyme, a song, in the box, in books, each element an instrument, the body still straining to parrot the spirit, a being of the air.
Thank you so much. Tell us why, when you were putting together the selected poems, you chose that one as the first one.
It's a poem, I hope, about making, not just about poetry, but about all human art, like decorating a hotel room, or singing a song, or memorizing a song, or improvising on a tune. The Joseph Cornell box, with its severity and eclecticism, let's say, that it's a rectangle, and then you can't tell whether there's going to be a receipt, a stuffed bird, a harmonica, what will be in it. I thought that might make a good implicit ars poetica. And the poem is called Rhyme. And one very favorable review of the book said it's very much like Robert Pinsky to have a poem called Rhyme that doesn't rhyme. And, of course, it does rhyme, but not in the conventional time of people who would expect something that's more correct. And when it's tongue, instrument, body, spirit, air, song, containment, ready, inherit there, among elements, study, parrot, sphere, rung, filament, unsteady, share it here. So the rhymes come at a somewhat eccentric, unconventional, but really in a way quite severe and demanding pattern. So if I have anything as a writer, it has to do with the ear, and I thought putting a poem first that has to do with the ear, and that puts poetry in a place with music and visual art. That was a kind of implicit who I am or hope I am.
So you emphasize the ear. I know for you that reading poetry is important. You believe that people should read it aloud.
I think it is a vocal art. Yeah. For me it is. I have nothing against beautiful books. For me, this is notation. The poem is something that happens every time anybody reads it, not just when the poet performs it like a singer-songwriter or an actor reads it. Those videos that you mentioned at favoritepoem.org, you have the construction worker reading Whitman, the Jamaican man reading a poem by Sylvia Plath and discussing them. you see those poems happen in that reader's voice. And for me, a poem, as much as a piece of music or a movie or a play or anything that happens in time, a poem happens every time someone says it, or even imagines saying it. And if you're not going to read it aloud, you should, in my opinion, at least be thinking about what it would feel like to read it aloud. Ultimately, what would it feel like to need to say these exact words? A slumber did my spirit seal, or air an instrument of the tongue, or three sorts of serpent do resemble thee. What does it feel like to say, further in summer than the birds? It's a feeling that's partly bodily and also in the mind.
The most recent book, Singing School, is an anthology of 80 poems by celebrated poets from the past. You're getting to you've begun to explain why that was an important project for you, why it was important to collect these 80 poems. What kind of school is this Singing School?
It's the book of my life as a teacher. It's my answer to everyone who said to me, what should I read to learn how to write poetry? Or what should I read to learn to write poetry? The best answer is you must decide what to read. That what you must read is things that you, as a reader, each person considers magnificent. That's what I take William Butler Yeats to mean when he says, there is no singing school, but studying monuments of singing's magnificence. And in the anthology Singing School, which is very much intended for poets, though I hope poetry readers will like it too, I say this book, I hope, will become obsolete for each person. These are my things I think are worth studying. I hope each reader will start typing up the poems you love and put them in a computer file called anthology, or write them out longhand. It's the way athletes learn a sport, the way musicians learn. You listen to great musicians. You seek the music you love the most. If you want to get better at basketball or tennis or anything else, you watch how the really good players do it. And that seems in a way kind of obvious, but I think young poets or aspiring old poets could learn. And I did find myself in those somewhat eccentric headnotes and introductions in that book, referring to sports and music quite a lot.
You've stated in those headnotes that when you write a poem, you compose it.
I think it's a better word than write. In a way, writing is a misnomer. Mm-hmm. We know from lots and lots of poets that Wallace Stevens composed his poems while he was walking to work. Wordsworth also composed his poems while he was walking. And for me, there's a lot of evidence that William Carlos Williams composed his poems while he was driving. Mm-hmm. He was the first one to give really good descriptions of how you see the landscape when you drive, and when he bows from the wheel as he drives by the young housewife. You can be composing a poem while you're taking a shower or taking a walk, or driving is fine for it. And writing is a convenient way to describe it, but in a way writing is the amanuensis. Writing is writing it down, and even if you do have a pen or a keyboard in front of you, if you're doing it right, you're composing, for me, you're composing with your voice. You're listening to it.
Mm-hmm. You've written that you tend to use the dictionary more to look up the words you know, rather
very
than the
much.
words you don't.
The words you don't know, just use them sort of for their color and their smell and their feel. You want to look at the words you do know the meaning of, because then you'll learn something more about them. I think I was middle-aged before I understood that the word immediately contained the word medium. Do it with nothing in between. Medium is in between, like the news media between us and the events, and spirit medium, us and the other world. Something's in between, neither good nor bad. It's medium. To do it immediately is do it right away. And in my previous book of poems, Gulf Music, the book is permeated with my astonishment looking up the word thing. What could be a more ordinary word than thing? Thing was originally a verb. It was a Germanic verb in Old English, and thingon, that verb, meant to meet or confer. In Iceland, they still call the parliament the thingstead. And gradually then a thing became a conference, a parliament, a trial, a hearing. And then from that it became the issue, the question at hand. Like we see, had a thing about that. And then came our most common contemporary sense of the physical object. So a thing like this water glass is an assembly, and it is an assembly of all the people who had to do with the invention of glass, the refinement of glass, the marketing. For some reason, for years, a lot of this stuff came from France. This is almost certainly from China. There's a lot of voices.
In the Gulf Music volume, there's a suite of poems on things. One of them is book. Would you mind reading that poem for us?
Sure. A book is a thing. Book. Its leaves flutter. They thrive or wither. Its outspread signatures like wings open to form the gutter. The pages riffling brush my fingertips with their edges, whispering, erotic touch this hand knows from ages back. What progress we have made. They're burning my books, not me, as once they would have done, said Freud in 1933. A little later, the laugh was on him, on the Jews, on his sisters. Oh, people of the book, wanderers under us. When we've wandered all our days, said Raleigh, time shuts up the story of our days. Raleigh beheaded, his life like a book. The sound, book, lips, then palate, outward plosive to interior stop. Book, buch, the beech tree, pale wood incised with Germanic runes. Enchanted wood, glyphs and characters between boards. The reader's dread of finishing a book, that loss of a world. And also the reader's dread of beginning a book, becoming hostage to a new world, to some spirit or spirits unknown. Look, what thy mind cannot contain, you can commit to these waste blanks, the jacket ripped, the spine cracked. Still it arouses me, torn, crippled God, like Loki the schemer, as the book of Lancelot aroused Paolo and Francesca, who cling together even in hell, oh passionate, so we read. Love that turns or torments or comforts me, love of the need of love, need for need, columns of characters that sting sometimes deeper than any music or movie or picture, deeper sometimes even than a body touching another, and the passion to make a book, passion of the writer smelling glue and ink, sensuous, the writer's dread of making another tombstone, my marker, orderly, in its place, in the stacks, or to infiltrate and inhabit another soul as a splinter of spirit pressed between pages like a wildflower, odorless, brittle.
Thank you so much. The poem is about a thing, book, but it's also clear that you understand that poems are some kind of special thing.
Well, one of the reasons I emphasize voice so much is that there is a kind of possession by the dead. You know, if I recite a poem by Emily Dickinson, or Yeats, or Williams, a little fragment of that departed spirit is alive in me. They orchestrate what I do with my lips and tongue and teeth and breath. And poetry, every art has its own thing. Poetry its uniqueness is in that human scale vocality. I don't believe poetry can show images as immediately and vividly as film. I think for instant emotion, poetry can't match music. Music can be military or sexy or funereal or celebratory, and right away you feel it. Poetry works more slowly than that. Can't do what those arts do. Poetry happens in the audience's body. And that's another side of emphasizing voice, is that it is uniquely physical in that it's in the audience's body, and it's uniquely intimate and on a human scale. It needs that one person's voice. And as I said before, it doesn't have to be an actor's voice or the poet's voice. Most importantly, it's anybody's voice at all.
This is a good moment to ask you about the Favorite Poem Project. Say first what the Favorite Poem Project was, and also tell us what you learned from it.
Well, the idea of the Favorite Poem Project was we were adopted by the Clinton administration, which wanted to celebrate the year 2000. So our mission was a portrait of the United States through the lens of poetry in the year 2000, not the lens of the news or pop entertainment or sports or any number of things. And one thing I learned is that contrary to stereotype, there are many, many Americans who love poetry and speak about it very articulately. There have now been 3 anthologies published by Norton, not a charitable organization. They print these books because they seldom make money. The first one, Americans' Favorite Poems, is now in its 16th printing. And every poem in those books is accompanied by headnotes taken from letters people wrote me. So I learned that there are plenty that when we didn't know, we didn't have a lot of publicity machinery. Anytime I was interviewed, I said, this is the website, this is where you can write. And it was not a survey. People had to write. I said, write a few sentences. Write some sentences about a poem you love. And we got tens of thousands of letters. And there are those videos. People sometimes say, where did you find those people for the videos? I didn't find them. They found us. They wrote to us. I'm happy to say it's now resuming in Chicago. This winter, they're going to shoot, the Poetry Foundation is going to shoot 5 more videos in Chicago, because all the ones you see on the DVD that comes with the book, Invitation to Poetry, all the ones you see on the website, favoritepoem.org, those are all shot on the 2 coasts. Mm-hmm. They're shot in LA, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Miami, Washington, Baltimore, Boston, New York, Hartford. We left out the whole, we ran out of money. And now, starting with Chicago, by increments, we're going to fill them in. And so there's a kind of patriotic meaning to the project for me. You know, our poetry, poems by Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, they're poets in every language in the world who've been influenced by that. There are poets writing in African languages, poets writing in Asian languages, for whom Walt Whitman was an important figure. And along with our jazz and our feature film, it's one of the things we deserve to be remembered for. And I'm proud that the Favorite Poem Project does celebrate that. And it doesn't tell anybody that poetry's good. It's not advocacy for poetry. We asked people, what is a poem you love? What do you have to say about it?
You served as the U.S. Poet Laureate for 3 terms from 97 to 2000. How did you understand that responsibility and try to fulfill it?
I don't take it as a responsibility. It's not a job, it's an honor. It's really just a compliment. There was an opportunity to do the Favorite Poem Project. So the title was very nice. But titles and prizes, they're like getting A in school. Sometimes it means quite a lot, sometimes doesn't mean all that much. but it was an opportunity to do the Favorite Poem Project. And the Favorite Poem Project to me is serious. It's like my family and my writing. It's something I actually did. It isn't a compliment somebody paid me. So the Poet Laureate title was a way to create those videos and those anthologies, and I'm grateful for that.
You mentioned just a moment ago about that jazz is one of the great American arts, and I know that in the past few years you've been performing poems in collaboration with jazz musicians for Poem Jazz. What inspired you to pursue that project?
Kind of a series of accidents. Charlie Simic's brother, Milan Simic, is a jazz booker. He booked Charlie and me into the Jazz Standard. This is probably getting about 10 or 12 years ago now. And we were with great musicians, Mike Minieri, Andrew Cyril on drums, Lonnie Plexico. And I played in high school and college. It was my main thing. You know,
what was your instrument?
Tenor saxophone mostly. And you know, I had my daydreams about being a great musician, and my joke about that always is there's only one obstacle. The only thing that held me back from being a really great jazz musician was a deficiency of talent. So I changed over to words sometime in my late teens, early 20s. So it was a chance to feel again that joy of collaborating musically with other people, working with other people musically. And some part of my mind, what I'd always been doing with the poems, was musical, and musicians get it. The musicians and I enjoyed it. The second time we did it was with Vijay Iyer, and it was clear that Vijay was listening very carefully to what I was doing in the poems. He could hear me listening to him. We're going to perform again in Boston in a couple of months, but I've done a lot of the CD with Lawrence Hobgood. And when we perform, Lawrence has the text of the poem on the desk of the piano as though it were sheet music. And I'm improvising things to do with pace and repetitions. He's improvising things to do with the music. And you know, the Jazz Press has been very nice about the CD, Poem Jazz, and we'll probably do another one. And it's just, in a word, it's a great pleasure.
Among your many efforts and projects is translation, and you've translated Dante's Inferno. How do you understand that activity? How do you go about translating?
The wonderful old expression may be better than the word translation, because translation literally means translatere. It's to carry across, and anybody who's tried knows you can't carry meaning across from one language to another the way you carry a loaf of bread across the street. Pane is not bread. I mean, it is bread. If that's the substance you want, you can say bread or pane and get the substance. But the words are utterly different. And the languages, in English we say somebody's a good guy, oh, he's as good as gold. Italian, well, I am pezzo di pane. He's a piece of bread. It's a different compliment. He's as good as gold. He's like a piece of bread. So that's only one word. And the old term that I think is certainly more accurate for what I did with Inferno, I'm not a great Italian at all. It's not my strong point. I did an Englishing. And I think Englishing is an accurate term for what you do. And there's that great essay by Walter Benjamin, The Task of the Translator. And my interpretation of that essay is the best translation that will ever be done of the Commedia of Dante is the Italian version that Dante Alighieri did of an original in the mind of God. No translation will ever be as great as that one. However, the Swedish translation, the Japanese translation, the Navajo translation, the Yiddish translation, the Igbo, translation, each adds a little information, moves over to the side, a little information about that original in the mind of God. If they're good, if they're strong, good translations, you learn how Swedish or Japanese or English had to buckle and change and readapt itself to try to get at that reality that's Inferno or Commedia. And I tried to make one that was fast. I use fewer words than any verse translation or prose translation. Other things I don't do so well, things I may not get. But I do a version of Terza Rima, and by translating Dante's sentences rather than his lines, it moves along. If you look at my book, on the left you see the Italian, the terzini, and on the right you see the English, and the English have a white space between the tercets. English is a more compact language than Italian, so that the white space is necessary so you can move along faster. That's kind of specific. The general idea of translation is what I said about that original, and if you're faithful enough and you can make a work of art out of it, there's a justification for what you've done to exist. Your Englishing or your Swedishing has a right to exist.
We have just about less than a minute. I just want to ask you quickly, you've written that a poet is a particular kind of expert.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
We all hear the cadences of sentences. We all hear inflections. We all can tell the difference between. That was a question. And was that a question?
What did you mean?
Yeah, what did you mean? I know what I meant. We all listen to the vowels and consonants. We all use them, just as we all walk. Poet, dancer is an expert walker. Poet is an expert user of the vowels and consonants and sentence sounds of a language.
Robert, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It's been a huge pleasure.
Pleasure for me too, Paul. Thank you.
We've been speaking with Robert Pinsky, former United States Poet Laureate. He is the author most recently of Singing School, Learning to Write and Read Poetry by Studying with the Masters. On November 7th, 2013, Pinsky gave a reading as a guest of the UO Creative Writing Program. Thanks for watching.